Okay, in this next video we're going to be looking at some more examples of solving equations involving absolute value. Specifically, we're going to begin by looking at equations that involve two absolute values, and then we'll move on to one special case with an absolute value equation that we need to be aware of. So consider the question, if the absolute value of two numbers are the same, what can we say about those two numbers? So think about some situations where the absolute value of two numbers would be the same. If they're the same absolute value, well then they could be the same number. Absolute value of 8 is equal to absolute value of 8. Or the other possibility is that they could have opposite signs. So in other words, one could be positive and one could be negative. A could be positive 8 and B could be negative 8. Or A could be negative 8 and B could be positive 8. And so it's this idea that we're going to use as we're solving equations where we have two absolute values that are equal to each other. So consider, for example, absolute value of 5x minus 13 equals absolute value of 7x plus 11. Right? So either those two numbers, 5x minus 13 and 7x plus 11, have to be the same number, or those two numbers, 5x minus 13 and 7x plus 11, would have to be opposites. So either they're equal, or the first one's equal to the opposite of the other one. And so that gives us two equations, and now we just proceed to solve those two equations. So I ask you to take a moment and solve the first equation. And so to do that, we want to get x on one side, so I subtracted the 5x off to get the x just on the right hand side. And then while I was at it, I went ahead and said, well, the number I want it on the other side, so I'll take that 11 there off to the other side. That gives me the equation negative 24 equals 2x. We can then solve that equation by dividing both sides by 2, and we get that x is equal to negative 12. So one of our solutions is going to be negative 12, and you can go back into the equation and plug negative 12 in and see that that works. In the first side, 5 times negative 12 would be negative 60. Negative 60 minus 13 would be negative 73. So the absolute value would be 73. On the other hand, negative 12 times 7 would be negative 84. Negative 84 plus 11 is negative 73. Absolute value would again be 73, so they do work. So you can always check these equations. In the second equation, I would begin by distributing that negative sign on the right hand side to get negative 7x minus 11, and then I would proceed to solve the equation. So I could do that by, this time I'm going to move the 7x over by adding it. That'll put the variable on the left hand side as a 12x, and while I'm at it, I go ahead and move the 13 over to the other side by adding 13 to both sides. So I get 12x equals 2, divide both sides by 12, and I get the answer x equals 1/6. And so we have two solutions to this equation. Moving on, let's consider a second equation. Here we have absolute value of 2x minus 2 equals absolute value of 14 minus 2x. So again, writing down my two equations, either they're both the same, or the first thing, 2x minus 2, is the opposite of the second thing, 14 minus 2x. And then I proceed to solve each equation. So in the first equation, I bring a 2x over to get it on the left hand side, and I go ahead and move the 2 over to the other side to get the variable by itself. I get 4x equals 16. I can divide both sides by 4 and get x equals 4. You may want to take a moment and try to solve the next equation. So I begin by distributing the negative sign. That'll make that minus 14 plus 2x. And now when I try to get the variable on one side, I say, whoa, wait a minute. That means I'd have to subtract the 2x off. But now my variables have disappeared, and I have an equation that can never be true. And so that equation has no solution, and therefore we have only the one answer this time, and that's x equals 4. Okay. One last example. Consider the equation absolute value of 3x minus 6 equals negative 9. Now, in all the problems that we've been doing so far, you really don't, as long as you're doing everything correct, you don't have to check your answers. Here's one time where you would work through the problem and get answers, but they're all going to be wrong answers. Why are they going to be wrong answers? Because absolute value is always positive. Here we have absolute value being equal to a negative number. That can't happen. So you could solve this equation like we've done and get different answers, but when you plug them back into the equation, they're never going to be equal to negative 9 because absolute value makes it positive. So this is one that you just kind of keep your eyes out for. Anytime you have absolute value equal to a negative number, it's not going to work. Okay? All right, until next time.